Thank you to the Bank of Thailand for inviting me to this conference. I was a student of Townsend's at Chicago. I read many of the papers about Thailand. It's great to be finally in Thailand, which I studied so much. And I would like to thank Townsend for all he's done for me, personally. He's been really like a great mentor. Has greatly influenced my work and how I think about economics as a way to improve, as a tool to improve social policy. Most of my work is related to inequality and the sources of inequality, and in particular the sources of inequality that arise because of the way parents interact with their children. I would like to show to you, I think that there are many ways that I could show to you how inequality arises really early on in the lives of children. I think that one interesting way of looking at this is through this work by two developmental psychologists in the 1980s. What they did was they had their research assistants follow children 1 hour per day, 1 day per month. From the time that the children were 9 months old all the way to the time that the children were 36 months old, they would bring these children would be, the research assistants would have a tape recorder, and this is why they would do this only for an hour. At that time, the tapes ran for an hour, so they had this very bad technology. They would then go back to the research lab and they would transcribe every single thing that actually was in that tape. So if it was TV, if the words were coming from the TV, they would take notes of how many words were coming from the TV, how many minutes the TV was on, and etc. If the words were coming from an adult person, they would count the number of words that the adult actually had spoken, either to the child or around the child. And if the words were spoken by the child, they would not only count the number of words that the child actually had spoken, they would also count the number of different words that the child had spoken at every point in time. They called it the vocabulary of children at every point in time. So for example, if I say, if I were a child, a 9-month-old child, and they came to my home and I said, mama, 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 I would have said one different word, three times, right? So what this picture here is showing is the number of different words that they knew at each point in time. And this is because this was so labor intensive. The sample size was really very, very small. So we're talking about 40 different families that were investigated very extensively over a 3-year period. 6 of these children came from very poor families, so poor that the parents actually qualified for welfare programs in the United States. And the other 36 actually came from higher income families. And what you see here, what this picture shows, which is very interesting, is the 6 welfare children at age 36 months had the vocabulary size that the children from the 13 high SES parents had when they were 24 months old. So at 36 months, they were already noting that language development, the difference in language development is already 1 year of developmental delay that the low-income children actually had. At the time when this study came out, this was very controversial. There were numerous replications of this study, and to this day there are replications of this study. And unfortunately, replication after replication, what we find is that inequality in human capital starts to open up really very early. And there are other data sets that I could show to, that I could point. It's not only about language, it's also about numeracy skills, it's also about social-emotional development, it's also about health. Regardless of the dimension of human capital that you are interested in, you're going to see this inequality opening up really very early on. One of the things that they didn't know at the time, but we do now know, is that language development really depends on the quality of the language environment children are exposed to. Patricia Kuhl did a study in early 2000 in which she assigned children to 5 different groups. One group was, 4 of these groups consisted of children that actually were born by, they were American babies. born from parents that actually had no knowledge of Mandarin. But these children, these 4 groups of children were assigned, randomly assigned to a control group. They lived their lives normally. A treatment group in which the children interacted 1 hour a day with a nanny that spoke Mandarin to them, and only Mandarin. 1 hour a day with a video of the nanny speaking Mandarin. 1 hour a day with an audio, a tape of the nanny speaking Mandarin. And then there was a 5th group, which consisted of children that actually were born in Taiwan and raised in Taiwan. They did this for 1 year, and then they followed up and measured Mandarin knowledge. And the children that actually had been exposed to the Mandarin, to the nanny, the live nanny speaking Mandarin to them, had pretty much the same knowledge of Mandarin than the children that were raised in Taiwan and were living and being raised 24 hours speaking Mandarin. The other groups actually were no different than the control group. So this confirmed a long-standing view in linguistics that language development really depends on live interaction and really depends on feedback. Hart and Risley did not know this when they were doing this study, but they did notice the following thing. This is the number of words addressed, not necessarily to the child, as they point here. If you actually carefully read the book, it's impossible to know that some of the words are spoken not to the child, but around the child. But in any case, this is one measure of language environment that is very difficult to get better than what they did. I am speaking to you at a rate of about 300 words per minute. The children from the low SES families, they heard about 750 words per hour. And by the way, Hart and Risley tried to go at a time in the day that was high talking time. So we were talking about going to the homes of these children during dinner. In the United States, this is when a lot of family conversation takes on. The children from the low SES parents, the high SES parents, they already start at a much higher level, 1,500 words per hour, but it increases over time, almost to above 2,000 words per hour. A lot of it is because these children will have superior language development, and they will start more conversations. And because they're going to start more conversations, the parents are going to answer the conversation. They're going to answer to the children, which will then lead the child to continue the conversation. So a lot of the differences that you see here already, to some extent, pick up differences in human capital formation that high SES children start to experience really much earlier than low SES kids. So what was fascinating to me when I saw this, I had been working for a long time on trying to understand the role of credit constraints on inequality that arises early on. And if you look at this data, it's very difficult to be able to explain this through credit constraints. People don't actually have to pay to speak to their children. What is really interesting is a lot of the language that we see nowadays, when we are actually redoing a lot of these studies in some parts of the world. And what we see is that the difference in language environment that children are exposed to, part of it is determined by differences in material resources. So for example, children that have more books, parents will read more often to them, but this explains a tiny difference in terms of the language environment, because even parents that read a lot to their children, they tend to read 15 minutes a day versus 0 minutes a day. I was very happy when I read the book. I learned a lot, but I was also deeply depressed because everything that I had been working on, I realized couldn't be the explanation of the differences in investments in early human capital. Then to make me even more depressed, I saw another study that actually measures the amount of time, minutes. It doesn't measure the quality of the interaction. It measures the amount of time that parents devote with the child. Now, it's really interesting because at different stages of their life cycle, and especially during infancy, the types of skills that children develop are very special. So for example, you don't want to teach value function to a 2-year-old. It's not helpful. If you want to try, go ahead, do it. It's not helpful. At that stage in the life cycle of children, they are actually developing attachment to an adult person. This turns out to be super important because without attachment, they will not feel emotionally secure to actually trust that adult person as a source of information later on in their lives. Okay? This happens not only with humans, this happens with every kind of animal that we know. So for example, if I pair a duck with a dog for 2 months, the duck will believe that the dog is the father or the mother, no matter what I do later. I can show the mama duck and they will, the little duck will still think that the dog is the mom and will follow the mom. So this notion of attachment that is so important, we actually do this naturally. This is when you see a parent talking very, in the United States we call it baby language. So we change intonation when we actually approach a very young child. We tend to speak, Towson still speaks to me like that because he still thinks that I am very young and doesn't understand anything about the world. But this is, we are programmed to do this to some extent because we know that this actually is building attachment to the child, with the child. What's super interesting when we saw this work by Ariel Khalil and her colleagues is that the gaps in time, in the amount of time, in terms of playing peekaboo with the child, singing songs, you know, like ticklish the child, and then speaking, oh, you're so cute. This huge difference in time that we see is actually larger exactly at a time in which children are between 0 and 2 years old, which is the time at which this is so important for their own development, okay? When the children are 3 to 5 years old, this is when you start playing with the child, but the playing here is organized so that there is some teaching involved. The teaching might be teaching of social-emotional skills, or the teaching might be teaching of letters, colors, something along these lines. And again, the gap in time is not across all types of activities that one could do. The gap in time when children are 3 and 5 years old, the largest gap in time is exactly for these types of skills that are so important for the child exactly at that age. So then again, that led me to question the idea that credit constraints may not be the #1 explanation of why certain parents succeed in producing human capital of their children and why other parents fail. I then started thinking of the idea that maybe some parents don't know the production function of human capital. So let me start by saying that this is not a new idea. Actually, if you go back to the literature in developmental psychology, this is something that the developmental psychologists were really worried about even in the 1950s and 1960s. There's a beautiful quote by Vygotsky, one of the developmental psychologists that created early childhood programs that are now shown to promote social-emotional development in children. He said, what I really am concerned about child development is that parents may not know the correct way to interact with children at different stages of the life cycle of their children. I was very surprised when I saw that quote, and I was even more surprised when I saw that psychologists had actually not acted too much on it. Not in terms of theory, but they created a lot of programs that actually try to improve parental knowledge about child development. One of the largest ones, and one of the earliest ones, is the nurse-family partnership. In the United States, nowadays it serves about, I want to say 40 or maybe even 50,000 children in different states in the United States. This pairs mothers who are first-time moms, teenage moms, single moms. A lot of these moms were not planning to become mothers at that stage of their life cycle. And what this is literally a support but also informational program. It tells them about things that they should be aware when it comes to child development and things that they should be promoting for their own child. This program has actually been demonstrated to reduce child abuse and child neglect. This by itself is super important because children that are abused or neglected, they are more likely to go to emergency rooms in the United States, and this is a super expensive form of health care. Another one that has been now implemented in a lot of, in different parts of the world is the Jamaican Nutrition Supplementation and Cognitive Stimulation Program. This was originally developed by Greta McGregor, who moved from England to Jamaica in the 1980s. And she was really shocked to see the stunting rates and low developmental rates in terms of cognitive development in the neighborhood in Jamaica where she became a physician. So she created this very cheap program that actually just tells parents, here are things that you can do with your child using materials that they actually have at home. So for example, if you have a detergent bottle, the detergent bottle is blue with a cap that might be red, then this is a great way to introduce the child to different colors. And then you can have an entire conversation of all things that are blue and all things that are red just because of that detergent bottle. So there are experiments going on all over the world trying to see if the program that was designed in the 1980s is still useful in this day, and early evidence that suggests that that's the case. So I've been involved in 3 programs myself. A lot of my research nowadays is trying to see how we can actually translate this notion of not understanding production function in programs that can actually help parents do better and help their children reach all the potential that they have. One is a program in Ceará in Brazil. It's the poorest, one of the poorest 36 of the poorest locations in Brazil. Really very, there are a lot of difficult issues that we have there. A lot of those issues relate to the parents themselves don't have a lot of literacy skills. Another one is a Jumpstart program that was created by a school district in the Houston area. They identified that children start school at age 4 with severe developmental delays in language, in cognitive development, and social-emotional development. So this program actually is trying to see if parents can help their children reach pre-K, ready to learn. These are, both the Brazilian program and the Houston program are very typical in terms of what we call home visitation programs. The only difference is because we wanted to be cost-effective, instead of sending a home visitor to the homes of these parents, we actually asked the parents to come to the center. In particular, the Jumpstart program, we asked the parents to come to the school. One of the things that we've been worried about is the parents that actually don't know about the way that they can improve language development of their children are also the parents that are not going to get involved with their children's education once that child actually reaches the school. So they're not going to be checking that the child is actually doing the homework or not doing the homework. And we want to get parents engaged into the school experience as early as their children are. In Philadelphia, we are doing the Lean A Start program. I'll talk a little bit more about this. The difference here is that we actually have very objective ways of telling the parent how well they are doing in terms of one dimension of parenting. The theory that I'm going to show in a few seconds about not knowing the production function. One of the things that has been plaguing my own progress in this area is how do they actually form these beliefs? And there are 2 competing theories about how they form these beliefs. The Lean A Start program and the Jumpstart program are ways to try to address these different forms. One idea is that beliefs are formed because of information. So you acquire information or you receive information from your own parents about the right way of raising your child. If that's the theory, then providing very concrete feedback about how you're doing, how your child is actually reacting to the higher levels of investments that you are doing, will actually affect your beliefs. Another idea of the formation of the beliefs is that the formation of the beliefs are totally endogenous and depend on the environment in which the parents are. Here's the situation in which I am a parent and I live in a neighborhood that is extremely violent and the school is horrible. And then I'm thinking, will I actually make a difference in my child's life? And I start thinking, maybe not, because even if I can get my child to learn more language, then my child will go to this horrible school. And by going to this horrible school, my child is not going to learn anything. this would be, if beliefs are formed in this way, this requires a completely different form of intervention. We are now working with the city of Houston to see if we can implement a program in which we randomly select parents to move away from locations that are very violent with horrible public schools to locations that are really very nice locations with very good high-quality schools. These will be, the goal here is not only to try and do better public policy, the goal is also to try and see if we can make progress about how parents actually form these beliefs and how difficult it is to change the beliefs that they are formed. So let me start by showing a few equations. I apologize, but I want to be very concrete in what we're actually doing. So here's what we would call a production function of human capital, or the technology of skill formation. In the left-hand side here, I'm going to adopt the simplest model that I can. So this is going to be, let's say, the human capital at the end of the period. At the end of the first period, early, let's say that this is early infancy. Then this is the human capital children are born with. This is the amount of investments that parents are going to do. I'll be a little bit more clear about how we measure those things. And this is an interaction term. The reason why I have this interaction term here, otherwise, if psi 3 were 0, this would be a straight Cobb-Douglas production function. The reason why I have this interaction term here is that there is a lot of work that I did with Jim and Jim Hackman and Suzanne Chenak showing that psi 3 here is actually negative, meaning that early investments in children might actually be more productive for children that are born with lower levels of human capital. But over time, as children age, all the data that we see so far seems to suggest that the sign of psi 3 also changes. And this is why Heckman talks so much about the importance of early investments. This is an error term. I'm going to assume now that parents don't know it. This, for everything that I'm going to do, it's not going to be important for most of my talk today, but in the paper, actually, we assume that the parents know part of it, and there is a part of it that they don't know. But I don't want to be carrying multiple variables that are going to be not useful. What I am talking about is, the typical economic model would say, I'm going to tell you what the parental preferences are going to be. I'm going to tell you what the constraints are going to be. So we would have a budget constraint and we would have a production function constraint. In very simple terms, what I am doing is adding another constraint to this problem. And the constraint is parents may not know what the true production function is. So child development is driven by the true production function, but parental actions are driven by their beliefs about what the production function is. So instead of having psi 0, psi 1, psi 2, what I'm going to have this additional constraint that says parental beliefs are such that this is going to be their beliefs about psi 0, this is going to be their mean beliefs about psi 1, this is going to be their mean beliefs about psi 2, this is going to be their mean beliefs about psi 3. And I could also say they have variance beliefs and so on and so forth. I set up the model today so that I can only talk about the mean beliefs. There are extensions looking at variance beliefs as well, and they do play a role across socioeconomic groups. And so here's the utility function that parents have. So it's a simple Cobb-Douglas. This is a little bit strange. We usually don't have in the utility function that parents may like to invest in children. But the nature of the investment here is really playing with the child, is interacting with the child. And then I had classmates that, not classmates, sorry, I'm not talking about UT. I had colleagues, I had several colleagues I talked to, and one of them told me, oh, I hate playing with my child so much that I actually tell my wife that I'll do the dishes and I'll throw out the garbage if I can reduce the amount of reading to my child that I actually have to do. And then I had another one who said exactly the opposite, and they were, like fighting each other, who had better preferences. And they wanted me to be the judge, and I said, I'll let your children be the judge of that, not me. And this is the production function, because this is, I set up this should be like a one-period model. There is no borrowing, there is no lending. I assume that the world is going to finish after this. This is to make things as simple as possible. Now, everything that I said here is actually done can be done in a dynamic framework. It's super interesting because this is the situation in which you would now have to start talking about those things that I said. How is it that the beliefs are being changed? Are beliefs a function of the information that the parents are receiving, or beliefs being set according to the environment in which they are, or the social network in which they are? And then if you give them just more information, they completely ignore it. So this would greatly increase the amount of notation that I would need. What I want to show to you is that in this very simple model, it's impossible to separate two things. Okay, so if you only have data on investments, income, prices of investments, you can't separate beliefs from preferences. In other words, when you see huge heterogeneity in beliefs, is it because parents like to spend time with their children, or is it because they believe that spending time with their children is important? So this unidentification argument is pervasive in economics. One of the ways that we can solve this identification argument is by saying parents have rational expectations. So they may, in average, they may be right. So in other words, their mu I2 would always be equal to psi 2. They might be uncertain about it. There would be variance, but on average, they would be right. I couldn't make, for the types of questions that I am interested in, I couldn't make this assumption, because literally what I want to do is, what are the kinds of parents that know the production function from what kind of parents don't know the production function? So what I'm going to do is show to you how I solve this problem by actually eliciting data that allows me to estimate for each parent what their mu2 is going to be, for each parent what their mu3 is going to be. And then I'm going to use data from investments and income and prices to figure out what alpha 1 and alpha 2 are going to be, because I already know at that time what mu2 and mu3 is going to be. Okay? Now this turned out to be far more difficult than I actually thought it was going to be. There is a lot of machinery that I'm not going to show to you, but the idea here is a very simple idea. I want to be sure that I'm comparing apples to apples. So here's what I'm going to do. The way developmental psychologists measure child development is the way I'm going to use exactly the same kinds of questions to measure beliefs. But I did so in a completely different way. So I started this study when women were pregnant, first time pregnant, so they had never had a baby before. So I couldn't ask them, has your child ever spoken a partial sentence of 3 words or more? And if I am interested in asking questions about belief, this question is not even helpful. So instead of asking them, has your child ever spoken a partial sentence of 3 words or more, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask them in 2 different ways. The first way that I'm going to ask this question is, how likely is it that a baby will speak a partial sentence with 3 words or more by age 24 months? That's not all of the question. That's only part of the question. Another way that you can do this, which doesn't sound very straightforward, that you could create expectations based on this question, is, what is the youngest and oldest age a baby learns to speak a partial sentence with 3 words or more? Okay? But this is not all of the question, because now, to complete the question, I need to tell them what is age 0 and what is x. So I'm going to create 4 different scenarios, varying the levels of age 0 and x. And the reason why I want to do this is because I have 4 unknowns, 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I ask them 4 questions, I get them 4 data points, which I then can use to run just a simple regression, mother by mother, and then recover what these mu's are going to be, right? So this is, I think that, let me not show, but these are the scenarios. I'm not going to show it because in different studies we frame the scenarios in different ways. We actually do focus groups with the parents to make sure that they understand what the scenarios are going to be. And also it depends on the kinds of questions that we want to ask them. But this would be very simple. So for example, if I, let me assume that mu3 is 0 for this mom. I don't have to do this. Then the way I would estimate mu2 is I would say, oh, this is her expectation about child development if the investment is high for a given level of human capital at age 0. This is her expectation for child development at the end of the period if investment is low for the same level of investment, and then divided by the difference in the amounts of investment. So that is straightforward to do. What's super interesting is what you get here. First is, as a lot of people would be worried in the 1950s and 1960s, developmental psychologists would say there is going to be probably a lot of heterogeneity in what parents perceive as the way to invest in their investments on the child is. It's exactly what you're going to get. So for any one of these parameters here, you're going to get a huge amount of variation. So there's a lot more variability across parents than the uncertainty that parents have about their own beliefs. So parents tend to be very right. They tend to be very sure about what they think is right. But there is wide disagreement across parents about what they think is right, the right way of helping children. What's really interesting is the higher the socioeconomic status of the parents, the more they believe that they can actually affect child development by investing in their children. The more uncertain they are as well about how much they can actually impact. The low socioeconomic parents, they don't believe that they can change much their child's development by investing in their children, and they seem to be very certain that that's the case. Okay, so those are things that. So here is preference parameters. We don't care so much about them, but here two. I'm going to show to you two simulations, and the simulations are the following. Let me take the largest numbers that we've seen for the estimation of the production function of human capital, and let us take the lowest numbers that we've seen, and let's see if we actually had a policy that would just inform parents what the true parameters are, and if we were able to change their beliefs about what the true parameters are by telling them, how much more investment would we get? And unfortunately, we would get some investment, but we would not get a lot of investment. So because parents tend to underestimate the production function, even if I looked at the lowest numbers that people have ever found in terms of the production function of human capital, I would only get 4%. If I look at the largest numbers that people have seen, and by the way, this is not the very largest. The largest numbers would be, this number here would be close to 1, but this, I believe, is an outlier from everything that I've seen so far. So we would increase investments by 12%. So beliefs matter. This suggests that beliefs probably are not the entire picture of the difference between high and low SES parents. And by the way, these are done in terms of hours per day of investment. So the typical parent in the United States spends about 2 hours a day investing in their children. So we would increase this by maybe 12% at the most. So one of these studies that we're doing is with Horacio Atanasio in Colombia. So Horacio has run this version of the Jamaican program. And we did, when they were doing the second follow-up, when the kids, 1 year after the parents had finished their participation in the study, we actually went back to the field and collected data on their beliefs about the production function. So this is the true parameters of the production function from that data set. These are the median parent in these rural villages in Colombia. And as you can see, what was very surprising to me is that the villagers in Colombia seem to have very good assessment of the production function of human capital. So we can't actually say that this number is different from this number, or this number is different from this number. However, we can say that this number is different from this number, and we can say that this number is also different from this number. This implies the following. This implies that this is the marginal productivity of investment as computed when you look at the true production function. This is the marginal productivity of investment from the median parent when you actually collect their data about their perception. So even in Colombia, even after being exposed to this program, it seems to be the case that parents, they had good ideas about these two parameters here, but they were still underestimating how much they could affect child development. So this is the study that we're doing now in Philadelphia. This is a little device. This records the language environment of the children 16 hours a day for 2 days. So this is much better technology than Hart and Risley could ever dream, because first it's non-invasive. It's very interesting because we actually drew this measurement a few times so parents get used to it. Because if you look at the first hour they have the device on, the amount of talk in the home is amazingly high. It's like they talk more than almost anything that I've seen. What's super interesting is most of the talk is they take the child, they put the child in their lap, they then call a friend on their cell phone, and they think, oh, I'm going to blow their minds off. They're going to think that I'm talking so much to the child that it's off the charts, except that all of them are doing this. So the charts are moving along. But in any case, what's really interesting about this is we can actually provide very detailed feedback to the parents about how they're doing in terms of their language environment. So this is not I can't show you a true because we have names. So this is like a fake report, but it gives you the idea about what's going on. So what you see here are 3 rows. So row number 1 is the number of the number of words addressed to the child or around the child in a given day. And in this column here, what I have is hour by hour of the number of words. So a star means that the parent actually reached the target amount of talking. So this is a little bit like if you have Fitbit or your iPhone or a smartphone, they come with like you have to give 10,000 steps. You have to walk at least 10,000 steps, and if you do walk 10,000 steps, they give you a little star. I actually feel good about this. I hope that parents will feel good about reaching, getting a star as well. And when we get a star, what we do is we explain to them, here's what you did. You actually improved. You reached your target. If they reach the target, then we raise the target for the next time. Because even speaking 12,000 words is actually gives them, they're not speaking as much as the high SES parents. And then we tell them, look, this is really, you did really well. You did particularly well at those hours here in which you really exceeded the target. Then at this point you reached again but did not. So maybe at this time, what were you doing at this time that you were not talking so much to the child? And what were you doing around dinner time that you were not talking so much? Now here we don't want the parents talking to the child here because the child are already in bed. So we need to, the child needs to actually sleep as well. But more important than adult words is actually conversation turns. It turns out to be very easy to increase the number of words adults talk to children. It's far more difficult to change the number of conversation turns between adults and children. This is where we tell them that, and we explain to them that this is particularly important for language development because it's based on this feedback that they receive from the adult that they actually acquire language skills. And again, what we are seeing is it's easy to change this, not so easy to change this, but when they do change this, we make a big celebration because it's so difficult. We tell them, this is so, what you accomplished is so difficult. And then we tell them, why did they actually got it done? So the other thing that we have is a lot of parents believed that if they just left the child in front of the TV, that the TV would count as adult words. And then we explain to them, I have bad news for you. The device actually, the computer software that we have in the device actually recognizes because of the sound frequency, whether this is coming from a live adult person or a TV. And most parents become completely discouraged when they see that their efforts of putting the child in front of the TV didn't succeed. And one example is here. So the first time it was 7 hours of TV on the first day, and then it went down for less than an hour. So we're hoping, the idea here is, can we change parental beliefs by providing feedback to the parent about the ways that they're doing right, the ways that they're not doing right, and see if we can change the beliefs. If we can't change the beliefs, what worries me is that the alternative policy, the alternative public policy that we can do to change how parents interact with the child is very expensive. And then we have to start thinking, is it cost effective to engage in that policy? So let me just conclude. I think that I have like maybe a minute. But there is now a large body of research that shows that parents actually have large influence on the development of their children. So parents choose who interacts with their children. They choose the quality of the interaction and how often that interaction takes place. So it's not only that the parents themselves interact with their children. The parents choose a child care provider for their child while they are at work. And it seems to be the case that another problem that happens in the United States is that parents are unaware about how to actually measure the quality of what is a high-quality childcare and what's a low-quality childcare. It's super interesting because every study that has been done in this literature, there are easy ways to fool the parent. So the parent comes to the childcare has a very nice reception area, cookies, coffee, everything is very bright. And then the parent, most of the parents, when they see this, oh, this is fantastic. And then they leave the child there, and then there is no interaction between the caretakers and the child. And then you have this other childcare environment in which they don't offer you cookie, they don't give you coffee, they're not, they don't have the nicest of the receptionists, but they're super warm and very interactive with the children. And it turns out that parents actually don't know, they can't say that this is the high quality child care place and this is the low quality child care place. In all that I've said here, you may think that this only applies for early childhood. Actually, it doesn't. The problem is parents are going to keep on having large influences on their children because they're going to choose the neighborhood in which they're going to live. They're going to choose the schools that they're going to attend. They're even going to choose the peers. I remember my parents telling me, oh, no, you're not going to be friends with that guy. You're not going to be friends with that guy. You're going to be friends with that guy. I said, no, but that guy is cool. He has a motorcycle. I'm 12 years old. I want to learn how to do the motorcycle. And he's like, no, you're going to get, he's going to get hurt. So no. And the same thing we see. And as there are now large studies that show that parents that have high beliefs about the ways that they can actually influence the child development, they're not only talking more, they're also going to the school and asking the teacher, why are you not teaching this thing to my child? And they're going to they're the ones looking for what is the best place my child can learn soccer or basketball or baseball. What is the best place that my child can learn music, and so on and so forth. So parents have huge influences, and they'll continue to have huge influences as the children age. And so this is why we've been trying to study this. So what is really unsatisfying at this point is that we know very little about the forces that actually determine how much parents invest in their children. We have made some progress on some questions like how to measure investments, how to measure human capital in terms of having a very well-defined cardinal measure of human capital, but not about why these large inequalities arise so early, what are the forces, and so on, and so on. So today what I told you is that really this is a small piece that is not income, is not availability of time, is parental belief about what they can actually do. So one of the things that we find not only in the study in Brazil, the study in Colombia, but also the study in Philadelphia, is that parents tend to underestimate the importance of their own efforts on child development. And now we're trying to see, can we change their beliefs? And if we change their beliefs, does it actually lead to higher levels of investment? Right? So one of the things that we know is that there are huge campaigns about getting people to exercise because it's good for health, and yet a lot of people don't exercise even though they know that it's good to exercise. So just changing beliefs may not be enough. Also, it may be necessary to change behavior, and changing behavior might entail changing beliefs in a lot of other things. And it's possible that you may actually find that you can change beliefs and you can change investments in a short amount of time, but maybe not over the longer horizon. And the last question that we're trying to answer, which might be true for some of the policies that we already have, but not for others, is whether those policies are cost effective or not. So, thank you.